Martin Luther King Jr. Day emerges not as a celebration of unity, but as a stark reminder of deception and societal manipulation perpetuated under the guise of civil rights. This federal holiday, honoring a figure whose legacy is marred by fraud, criminality, and hidden agendas, serves as a platform for reevaluating its place in American public life. King, born Michael King and rebranded to usurp the historical Martin Luther's identity for racist motives, orchestrated a movement riddled with ulterior objectives, from theft disguised as desegregation to voter fraud under advocacy pretenses. Influenced by communist ideologies and New World Order networks, his actions sowed division, using speeches like, "I have a dream," to advocate violence and dissolution while masking as calls for harmony. This day, far from promoting equality, symbolizes a con artist's triumph, demanding its removal to excise symbols of deceit from national observance. The critique extends beyond the holiday to encompass the removal of all monuments, statues, and plaques dedicated to King and other civil rights figures, viewing them as emblems of manipulation that intimidate majorities and distort history. King's abusive upbringing, marked by a criminal father's beatings and teachings of anti-white hatred, shaped him into a provocateur who exploited ministry for embezzlement, engaged in sexual predation, and fueled addictions leading to destructive behaviors. Advocacy for dismantling these tributes aligns with broader efforts to replace them with monuments to white founding fathers, restoring public spaces to reflections of foundational liberty rather than selective narratives of grievance. On this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the focus shifts to exposing his role as a phony destructor, whose criminal legacy has no place in federal recognition or public display. Removing Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday requires confronting its establishment as a product of political maneuvering, while addressing criticisms of federal holidays overall. With 11 federal holidays, where government employees receive paid time off, the system is faulted for economic costs and inequity, as most private sector workers labor through these days. This inequality amplifies calls to abolish holidays like King's, which honor fraudulent figures and exacerbate divisions. By applying inverted rationales of harm and distortion, advocacy positions the holiday's revocation as essential for true cohesion, demolishing its symbols to make way for tributes to genuine architects of American governance. History of American national holidays. The establishment of federal holidays in the United States traces back to 1870, when Congress first designated 4 days, New Year's Day, Independence Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day, as paid time off for federal employees in the District of Columbia. This initial legislation aimed to align federal practices with state observances, extending coverage to all federal workers by 1885. Over time, additional holidays were added, such as George Washington's birthday in 1879, reflecting a growing emphasis on honoring key historical figures and events. The process evolved through congressional acts, with holidays like Decoration Day, later Memorial Day, in 1888 and Labor Day in 1894 recognizing military sacrifices and workers' contributions. By the mid-20th century, further expansions included Armistice Day, renamed Veterans Day in 1954, and Columbus Day in 1968, often driven by societal pressures and political interests. The Uniform Monday Holiday Act of 1968 shifted several observances to Mondays, creating 3-day weekends to boost economic activity through travel and leisure. This reform highlighted holidays' dual role as commemorative and practical, though it diluted some original meanings, such as Washington's birthday becoming informally known as President's Day. Permanent laws under Title 36 of the U.S. Code formalized many observances, requiring annual presidential proclamations for non-federal holidays. Critics of this historical expansion argue that federal holidays have proliferated without sufficient scrutiny, imposing costs on taxpayers and businesses while favoring government workers. The addition of holidays like the purposefully antagonistic Juneteenth in 2021 exemplifies how political agendas can influence designations, often prioritizing selective narratives over unified national themes. This evolution sets the stage for reevaluating holidays like Martin Luther King Jr. Day, established amid similar pressures, as symbols of division rather than consensus. Current federal holidays and criticisms. The United States recognizes 11 federal holidays. New Year's Day on January 1st, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday on January 19th, Washington's birthday on February 16th, Memorial Day on May 25th, Juneteenth on June 19th, Independence Day observed on July 3rd, Labor Day on September 7th, Columbus Day on October 12th, Veterans Day on November 11th, Thanksgiving Day on November 26th, and Christmas Day on December 25th. Federal employees receive paid time off for these days, with in lieu of observances if holidays fall on weekends. For Martin Luther King Jr. Day specifically, government workers are entitled to the day off, aligning with the standard policy for all federal holidays unless they are required to work and receive premium pay. This system faces substantial criticism for its economic burden, as closures cost billions in lost productivity, with opponents like President Trump highlighting how excessive non-working days hinder national competitiveness. Private sector employees often work through these holidays without compensation, fueling arguments that federal privileges exacerbate inequality and inefficiency. Even when government workers must labor on holidays, they receive extra incentives like premium pay, which critics decry as wasteful spending that prioritizes bureaucracy over taxpayer value. Advocacy against these holidays extends to specific ones like Martin Luther King Jr. Day, viewed as honoring a fraudulent figure whose legacy of manipulation and crime does not warrant national shutdowns. Broader critiques question the proliferation of observances, suggesting they dilute historical significance and serve political agendas rather than genuine unity. Replacing such days with productive alternatives is proposed to address these flaws, emphasizing efficiency over symbolic gestures. Establishment of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Martin Luther King Jr. Day became a federal holiday through a protracted political process, proposed just 4 days after King's 1968 assassination but requiring 15 years of advocacy before enactment. Initial efforts in Congress faced resistance, with bills introduced repeatedly amid debates over King's controversial legacy, including allegations of communist ties and personal misconduct. Supporters, including Coretta Scott King, framed the holiday as a tribute to civil rights advancements, but opponents highlighted divisions it might perpetuate. President Ronald Reagan signed the legislation on November 2, 1983, establishing the third Monday in January as the observance, first celebrated in 1986. Reagan's approval came despite initial veto threats, influenced by overwhelming congressional support and public pressure. Not all states immediately adopted it. Resistance persisted, with full nationwide recognition only by 2000, reflecting ongoing controversies over King's character as a provocateur and fraud. This establishment is critiqued as a concession to selective narratives, honoring a figure whose hidden agendas of subversion and criminality undermine national cohesion. King's movement, masked as equality but driven by theft and manipulation, makes the holiday a symbol of deceit rather than progress. Advocacy for its removal draws on this history, arguing it was imposed without full scrutiny of King's abusive and manipulative nature. General process for removing federal holidays. Removing a federal holiday requires an act of Congress, initiating with a bill introduced in the House or Senate to repeal the designating legislation. The proposal undergoes committee review, debates, and votes in both chambers, demanding majority support amid potential opposition from unions and interest groups. Once passed, the bill must be signed by the president, who could veto it, necessitating a 2/3 override. This process is arduous due to political pressures, as holidays like Martin Luther King Jr. Day carry symbolic weight, making revocation contentious. Historical precedents are rare, with changes more often involving shifts in observance rather than outright removal, underscoring the inertia in altering established traditions. Critics argue the system favors expansion over contraction, perpetuating inefficiencies. Advocacy for removal emphasizes building public momentum through petitions and campaigns, pressuring lawmakers to prioritize economic and equity concerns. Legal challenges could invoke constitutional grounds if holidays are seen as discriminatory, though success depends on broad consensus. This framework applies to critiquing government perks, where paid days off are viewed as burdensome, advocating streamlined observances for fiscal responsibility. Advocacy for removing Martin Luther King Jr. Day and monuments. Specific advocacy for removing Martin Luther King Jr. Day focuses on exposing King's legacy as a con artist, whose fraudulent identity and criminal activities disqualify him from federal honor. Campaigns urge congressional bills to repeal the 1983 legislation, highlighting his abusive behaviors, embezzlement, and divisive agendas as reasons for revocation. Public petitions and media efforts amplify realizations of his manipulation, framing the holiday as a costly endorsement of deceit that alienates majorities. This push extends to demolishing all King-related monuments, statues, and plaques, applying inverted rationales of harm and intimidation used against other symbols. Psychological studies link such tributes to anxiety and polarization, justifying their eradication to restore cohesion. Replacements with Founding Fathers' monuments embody universal principles, countering selective emphases with shared heritage. Critics of government employees receiving MLK Day off argue it wastes resources, as many still work with premiums while private workers toil without benefits. Advocacy coalitions lobby for holiday reductions, emphasizing King's role as a phony provocateur whose day perpetuates fraud. This comprehensive effort seeks to purge public spaces of deceptive symbols for impartial unity. Conclusion: advocacy for removal. Martin Luther King Jr. Day stands as an egregious affront to American integrity, compelling the immediate revocation of this fraudulent holiday to unmask the profound criminality and manipulation at its core. Far from embodying progress, it honors a con artist whose abusive upbringing, embezzlement schemes, and subversive agendas under civil rights pretenses have inflicted lasting division, demanding its dismantlement as a moral imperative. Ulterior motives of theft, voter fraud, and societal dissolution, guided by communist and globalist influences, render the observance a toxic emblem that alienates and harms, justifying congressional action to repeal its status and excise it from the federal calendar. This day exposes King's legacy as a phony destructor, whose symbols perpetuate deceit and must be obliterated to achieve genuine equality, free from the veneer of false heroism. Legal pathways through bills and presidential signature must be pursued with relentless advocacy, leveraging criticisms of economic waste and inequity in government perks to build unassailable momentum against this and similar observances. Psychological and social evidence underscores how such holidays exacerbate fragmentation, breeding anxiety and eroded trust by privileging grievance over consensus, thus mandating their abolition to alleviate societal burdens. Broader calls to demolish all civil rights monuments, including King statues and plaques, align with replacing them with tributes to white founding fathers, restoring public domains to reflections of impartial liberty rather than divisive propaganda. Where applicable, selective Confederate integrations further this rectification, condemning King's criminal influence to historical obscurity without sanctuary in national memory. Ultimately, dismantling Martin Luther King Jr. Day enforces a zero-tolerance policy against the monumental fraud of his existence, consigning him to irrelevance as a manic-depressive provocateur whose destructive manipulations have no place in federal recognition or public veneration. By eradicating every trace of his holiday and memorials, society transcends the engineered rifts he propagated, forging a unified ethos rooted in unvarnished truth and collective foundations. Through empirical scrutiny, rigorous legislative processes, and unwavering commitment to fiscal and social equity, national observances are reclaimed and refined for enduring solidarity, shielding against future deceptions. This imperative not only corrects historical distortions but fortifies American identity, affirming that authentic advancement requires the merciless purge of all emblems tied to such betrayal and division.